And one of the regular personages that were put in front of me was Pete Lunn, about every 6 or 7 weeks, to talk about behavioural science. And it was something that I always cherished, insofar as that he gave insights into, you might think that humans would respond this way to this set of circumstances, but actually such and such an experiment was done in Uruguay, and it didn't quite work out like that. And he had worked as a journalist himself, as a producer in Newsnight, the flagship programme for BBC television. So I felt, well, he's robust and he's well able, and I will give him a punishment beating. Whatever he was postulating, I would think it was the most outrageous, ridiculous thing for role-playing. So not only did you have the content, or you had the entertainment value of me and him beating me up, and so on. And people felt, oh my God, Ivan, you're so rude to Pete Lunn. And said the same about Cara, how do they possibly put up with you? But actually it was a direct reflection of my affection and fondness and my enjoyment of sparring with them. So Pete Lunn here of the ESRI, the founder and the head of their behavioural science unit.
I'm going to struggle not to tear up here as I bask in the warm glow of Ivan's fondness, I think. Good morning, everyone. I gave my first talk on the behavioural economics of auto-enrolment in Ireland in 2006, at which point there were various government officials who told me at the time that no, the government was absolutely committed to this, was taking it very seriously, and that this was going to happen. And here we are 17 years later, and again I'm giving a talk about the behavioural economics of pensions in the context of auto-enrolment, but this time I actually genuinely really do, from everything I can see, think it is going to happen. Everything I do here today is, I've only got 15 minutes to talk about the behavioural economics of pensions, which is an incredibly short time to do this and is a real challenge. Everything I'm going to talk about is about the decision-making of employees and the perspective of employees. And what I'm trying to get across, so I'm going to do that thing of telling you what I'm going to say, I'm then going to say it, and I'm then going to repeat it. And what I'm going to tell you right from word go is that what I'm really saying is we always, everyone in this room has expertise or familiarity with the pension system. We always and consistently overestimate how much other people understand. In behavioural science, we refer to this as the curse of knowledge. When we know something, we find it really, really hard to take the perspective of the person that doesn't know it. Okay? And what I'm going to show you here are some examples of how employees really do think about pensions, what they do know, what they don't know. And I'm going to tell you what I think the implications of that are. And it's less about knowledge, and it's more about how people intuitively make decisions. That's the key thing to understand. Now, quickly before I do that, I'm going to say what are behavioural science and what is behavioural economics. And the reason I'm going to do that is because we've got to the stage in my profession where pretty much every consultancy in town will tell you that they use expertise in behavioural science and behavioural economics. Right? I'll park that sentence there because I think its implication is pretty clear. But what it really is it's the application of the scientific method to the study of human action. So what somebody like me does, I run the behavioural research unit at the SRI, is we conduct experiments. We conduct experiments on ordinary people, on representative samples, about what they understand, how they make decisions, especially financial decisions. That's one of our specialist areas. We look at what they take into account, we look at how they make those decisions, we look at what influences them, and we look at how they comprehend the way they've made those decisions, okay? And so we use quantitative measurement. We measure people's behavior, their choices, their judgments, and their beliefs, right, in order to really try to get some psychological insight into why it is that they're doing what they're doing. Now, that's what we do. I've got a very short amount of time here this morning. So what I'm going to do is I'm really just going to tell you about kind of 4 findings. We're going to run one little experiment with all of you in the room, just for fun, just to give you an idea of the kind of thing we do. And then I'm going to draw some concluding implications that basically say, given these experiments, and hundreds of others that I don't have time to talk about that give a kind of similar result, what might we infer from that? So that's what I'm going to try and do in the remaining 12 minutes and 40 seconds. So here we go. Right. Auto-enrolment is an example, as a policy, of what behavioural economists like me refer to as a default policy. Right? In other words, if you change the default setting, so the default in auto-enrolment is you go into the pension scheme unless you act. Whereas as things stand now, without auto-enrolment, the default is you don't go into the scheme unless you act. That's what I mean. Why are defaults so powerful? Now, there is about 30 years maybe even a little more, of behavioral economic literature that has answered that question really well. Right? I'm not going to show you the precise experiments. There's far, far too many of them. I'm just going to tell you what the upshot is. Because if you understand the psychological mechanisms that make auto-enrollment powerful, I think it's helpful in terms of how you talk about it, how you sell it to employees, how you explain it to employees, and so on. Why does it work? And it really, really does work. I mean, anywhere in the world, and by work, I don't mean it's a great policy. You can make your own mind up about that, but what it definitely does is it massively increases pension coverage in every country where it's happened. Okay? Now, why? Why is the default so powerful? You can choose to join the pension scheme or not. It's the same choice. All we've done is change how it's framed. All we've done is change the default. Why is it so powerful? Okay, defaults are powerful because they set the reference points for losses and gains. One of the things that human beings do is they weigh losses more than equivalent gains. So if you give something to somebody, they will ask for a kind of higher price, or it will take more to get them to give it up than they would ever give you to acquire it in the first place. So if you tell someone they're in a pension scheme by default, they feel like they're losing something by coming out of it, and they weigh that more than they would if they were actually to join it. Now, that might sound irrational to you, but it's a really strong psychological phenomenon, and we see it everywhere. That's one of the reasons. They are the status quo. So if somebody procrastinates or suffers from any kind of inertia, they'll stay in the scheme. They indicate advice. One of the things we know is that people feel hugely uncertain and unsure about pensions, so if there's an auto-enrollment scheme, there's a feeling that somewhere somebody in officialdom or some expert has decided this is a good idea, so it acts as a kind of proxy for advice. They also indicate what others typically do. In most walks of life, the default is set for the majority, so it's an indication of what others might be doing too. And again, when you feel uncertain or unsure, one of the things you do is you do what other people are doing, so the default gives you a signal of what others typically do. And finally, they require an action to depart from. And one of the things we know from many, many studies is what's referred to as a mission-commission bias in human beings, and it goes like this. If you act and something goes wrong, you will be blamed much, much more than if you don't act and exactly the same thing goes wrong. Okay, so anyone who's ever tried to change or reform anything instinctively knows this. If harm is caused by not doing something, it is judged much less harshly than if harm is done by doing something. So again, if there's a default there, people feel wary about moving away from it because they feel like they'll carry more responsibility or blame if something goes wrong. So all of these 5 psychological phenomena drive people towards defaults, and this is why auto-enrollment has such a powerful effect. But when you're thinking about how it is described and framed and communicated, it really is worth knowing what the psychology behind it is. Why does it work? And that's it there. Okay, I'm now going to tell you briefly about an experiment that we did in our lab. This was funded by the Pensions Authority, and the reason I'm telling you this is to tell you that people's intuition about money growth is terrible, okay? And it's a really, really simple experiment. We've actually done much more complex experiments with lots of controls to show this in more detail, but I'm just going to show you a really simple experiment, okay? And what this shows is that people just massively underestimate the benefits of regular saving or investment. And what I mean by that is what's called exponential growth bias, which is that people do not understand exponential relationships, so they do not understand how money compounds and how it grows at an intuitive level. So a really simple example of this is people's guess when we ask them to guess what is going to happen if you put 1,000 euros per year at a 5% return over a period of time. The correct answer is the black one. People's average guess and the interquartile range there, so almost everybody is miles below the correct answer, is the light grey. People hugely underestimate it. Now, most of the people in this room could do that calculation, I suspect. Right? And you might say, well, look, we need to educate people to do these kind of calculations, and then maybe we could get over this. One of the really interesting things about this is how deeply intuitive it is. People underestimate money growth who can do the calculation. What I'm talking about here is not whether people can do the calculation, it's your intuition. When you do the calculation, what happens is it surprises you, even if you can do the calculation, because your intuition is so bad. Okay? So the point to get across here is that there's something in our psychology, in the way we are, that linearizes the relationships we see in the world around us. And when we get something that's viciously non-linear, like compound interest and money growth, it goes totally against our intuition. So we have to do the calculation, and the calculation surprises us. Now, of course, most employees are not going to do the calculation. They're just going to work on their intuition. And their intuition is always going to be to underestimate, over long periods of time, how returns compound. So not only does this mean that small differences in contributions will get underestimated, so the benefits of joining the pension in the first place will get underestimated, small contributions will get underestimated. It also means that they will underestimate how much difference small differences in fees make. Because again, as we all know, that's a nonlinear effect that compounds over many years, and again, the employee simply will have the wrong intuition for that and won't understand it. And that's important because if we rely on competition to keep fees low, these employees are essentially our consumers. They are not going to shop around effectively for low fees. Why? Because they don't understand how much difference it makes, because their intuition isn't right. Okay. We tried to solve that by giving them a calculator. And one of the points I'm going to make to you here, and I've kind of already made it, is that education doesn't solve this problem. Okay? Because you can do the calculation and your intuition will still be wrong. So we gave people an intuitive calculator. One of the things you might try to do is intervene at the point of decision. If you do that and you give people intuitive calculators, I'm not going to go through this in huge detail, but essentially the way the calculator works, it says, how much difference does it make if I wait 5 years before starting my pension? Right? And you get people to then guess that, and then you give them the right answer there. And if you give them an intuitive calculator with feedback at the point of decision, so when they're trying to think about these things, you can partially get rid of exponential growth bias. But even if you give people a calculator and immediate feedback, the effect is only partial because their intuition is so wrong. Okay? All right. I'm going to just do something very briefly. This is a quick experiment about the value of time. And I'm going to ask you to raise your hands for one thing or the other. So please, don't be shy, don't sit on your hands, raise your hand for one thing or the other, right? I can see you. I might just pick on you if you don't raise your hand for either of them, okay? So, here's the scenario. You can either have 100 euros today. I stress this is a hypothetical experiment, okay? You can either have 100 euros today, or if you come back tomorrow, to me tomorrow, you can have 102. So have a quick think about that. Now put your hands up. Who is going to take the 100 euros in your hand now today? There you go. Half the pensions industry will turn down 2% a day. You told me these people were experts, Ivan. And who's going to take the 102 tomorrow? Yeah. Now, actually, it's split. It's probably the majority of the 100 today. I've clearly come across as completely untrustworthy in the first 10 minutes of this talk. I do 100 versus 102 because typically with most audiences it splits around 50-50. Now, let me give you another scenario. This time you can have 100 euros in 30 days or 102 euros in 31 days. Now, who's going to take the 100 in 30 days? I've got nobody. I very occasionally get one and I have no idea what to say to them. Right? Now, just think about that from the perspective of interest rates and time. What's going on there is that the price of a one-day delay is completely changing, depending on whether it's the difference between today and tomorrow, or whether it's the difference between 30 and 31 days. That is an absolutely instinctive part of human psychology. What's happening now, costs and benefits to us now, are weighed much more heavily than costs and benefits in the future, and the costs of delays in the future. Again, you don't have to be a genius to work out what the implications for how people think about pensions are here, but the degree to which they're going to discount that future income relative to their current income is very strongly inbuilt within our psychology, as I've just shown to you in this experiment. You can do this experiment not with 30 days, but with 30 years. You get exactly the same kinds of results. Okay? So some degree of support and help for people is absolutely essential because, again, their intuition is so far off. Okay. I'm going to talk very quickly about conversion problems. The example I'm going to give you is about whether people do or don't choose an annuity, but it could be when they're first taking out a pension and they're also thinking about what the lump sum versus the regular income in future, when they draw down the pension in the future will be. I just want to get across to you something, again, about our psychology and about how people think about converting money from regular income into lump sums, which is obviously an absolutely crucial part of any kind of DC scheme. So this is an example that we gave people in our lab. I'm not going to read all of it. It's pretty straightforward. We basically say, please imagine you're 65 and about to retire. As a result of saving for retirement, you've a lump sum of, what's it say there, 456,000 euros. Pensions company offers you the chance to convert this lump sum into a guaranteed monthly payment for life. In other words, they'll pay you a fixed amount every month until you die. Please type in the minimum guaranteed monthly payment for life you will be willing to accept to convert your lump sum. We randomized people, so half of our people saw this. We then gave the other half this. Please imagine you're 65 and about to retire. As a result of saving for retirement, you have a guaranteed monthly payment for life from the pensions company of, say, $850 per month. The pensions company offers you the chance to convert the guaranteed monthly payment for life into a lump sum today. Please type in the minimum lump sum. Now, don't worry about the precise numbers we used here, because we used a range of regular payments and we used a range of regular lump sums, and what we really looked at was what was the implied annuity rate that was the minimum that people would demand to make the swap. Okay? And when you do that, what you find is you get a massive difference depending on whether people are converting a lump sum to a regular income or whether they're converting a regular income to a lump sum. You get a strong and statistically significant difference. Now, you might look at that. That's the implied annuity rate. So our average annuity rates were people demanding just over 6% if they were given the lump sum and just under 5% if they were given the regular payment to make the conversion, the regular income to make the conversion. But if you think that looks quite small, the implication of that at the market annuity rate at the time that we did this experiment, which was about 4%, is that you'd have a difference between 39% of these respondents opting for an annuity versus only 17% of them, depending on whether you framed it as a conversion from a lump sum to a regular income or a conversion from a regular income to a lump sum. In other words, it's simply about what you make people first think of and the direction that they make the conversion in. And again, this is a piece of psychology that's now quite well known. Whatever direction you make the conversion in actually has an impact on what you demand or what you expect from the conversion. Okay? All right, this is my final slide. One of the implications of experiments like this, I've only shown you 4, there are hundreds that I don't have time to go into, and I'm trying to get across to you how employees and ordinary people intuit the kind of things that we need them to intuit about their pension. And I think what it tells you is that to improve people's decisions, to get good decisions about pensions from employees, disclosure of information is clearly simply not enough, right? If our reasoning and our intuitions are biased in the ways that I'm showing you and are so easily manipulated as the ways that I'm showing you, disclosure of information is not enough. Interestingly, neither is education enough. We do find people who've got better financial education do slightly better on some of the tasks we give them. But the word there that really matters is slightly. Right? And the kind of intuitions and the kind of intuitive mistakes that I'm showing you in some cases here are as common among well-educated people and people with a financial education as people without. Financial advice is not enough too, for obvious reasons, again. What I would really get at is, as a behavioral economist, I'd say what you've got to do is test and improve the choice environment. You have to intervene around the point of decision to help people make these kind of decisions. And that involves simplification. It involves providing people with really good intuitive decision aids that give them feedback like calculators. You know, if people don't know how to convert between lump sums and regular incomes in a consistent way, well, maybe what we need to do is just give them quite a lot of practice with the calculator, get them to play quite a lot beforehand. Tell them, perhaps, about the finding that people do it differently depending which direction they're going with before they make a decision. We can make boosts where at the point of decision we actually give people things like quizzes and videos and things that really help them to get over some of these biases, and we can test those for effectiveness. Do they work? Do they improve decisions? And we can also try to protect investors from a regulatory point of view from decision environments that are clearly bad environments, environments that are built in such a way that might exacerbate or exploit the kind of biases that I'm talking about here. And the final animator I'm going to put up here is, without a shadow of a doubt, what it tells us is that we absolutely have to regulate the fees and regulate them strongly. So I hope you found that interesting and hopefully a little bit provocative too, and thank you very much for your attention.
Okay. Just one question to extrapolate from that. If people think very short term and instinctively and intuitively make bad judgments, when we're designing the auto-enrollment scheme, should we exclude an opt-out? Should we exclude post-retirement benefits of just cashing in your chips? If people will... If your whole argument is you need to regulate for the best outcome.
So we know that there are countries that have gone for compulsory second-tier occupational pensions. Right? We know that's true. That ultimately is a political choice. So you're going to think I'm dodging this question, but what I'm really saying is, as a behavioral economist, I can't answer that question without introducing some politics and some values. Auto-enrollment does work very well in terms of hugely increasing people's pension coverage. So it is going to have beneficial effects for retirement income. Countries that introduced it early, like New Zealand, have done extremely well out of it in terms of increasing coverage. There are some concerns about it. There are people who opt out who may not have good coverage, and they may opt out for good reasons or bad reasons. They also might get defaulted onto low contribution rates. And I thought the point Zoe made earlier about people thinking it's taken care of once they're in the scheme and then getting a nasty shock later when they discover they haven't been taken care of as well as they might want to be, that's a really important point. Right, so you can make an argument for and against a kind of more compulsory system, or keeping it as a system where you can opt in or out. The behavioural economics doesn't tell you which one of those is right. But what it does do is it says, look, if you're going to go for an auto-enrolment scheme, there are things you really need to support and help employees with, because there's so much they're still not going to understand and there's a lot they won't engage with.
Pete Lunn, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much indeed.